Esteemed friends, may our Lord Jesus bless us. May his light and peace be with one and all. We would like to express our most sincere thanks and goodwill to everyone who is participating in this event, and to all who may be following us remotely, as well as our most sincere thanks to our friend Geraldinho for the honorable invitation to participate in this second world encounter of the Friends of Jesus Christ with Chico Xavier and his Spiritist works. In this presentation, by the hands of Chico Xavier, we will seek to bring you, in a simple way, a few aspects that we consider to be important in his life. We will speak about the man, about some of the physical effects phenomena, and, of course, about his writings. When we speak about Chico Xavier, we immediately remember the great missionaries, because they are the ones that bring us a very well-defined vision of life from the spiritual plane, and they come, without doubt, to enlighten us. Chico Xavier was no different. His battles and his difficulties were great, not necessarily because he needed to experience them, nor because he needed to atone for any past errors in the slightest. In truth, it was because he also came to enlighten us, to testify to the lessons that Jesus left for us, and to show us in our lives, through his own example, how we can and should endeavor to best live our lives on this earth. We are all apprentices of the great light that was Chico Xavier. We know that missionaries don't choose the easy path to walk. They choose the most sinuous and tortuous roads, and Chico Xavier's life was a veritable training boot camp in this aspect. From his earliest childhood, he lost his mother when he was just 5 years old. He suffered that incredible loss, and he was forced to live with his godmother, Ricardo, as his father was unable to provide for his entire family. However, the contact he had with his godmother was an absolute nightmare, as we know. It was a huge torment, as she didn't understand him. It got to the point where she would poke forks into his belly, and he would have to wander about with them sticking out of him, bleeding all over the house. He would go without food for days at a time, and she would force him to literally lick his own dirty wounds. It was very difficult for him, but his mother, Maria João de Deus, would appear to him by means of his clairvoyancy, and she would advise him to never ever retaliate to any offense. She would tell him that he needed to be patient, and that later she would send him an angel that would be with him. That angel would be, as we know, his second mother, Dona Cidália, who would be with him for a few years. His mother told him to never answer any evil or wrongdoing he might be a target of with any like sentiment, as his godmother could, as a result of the mental instability and imbalance that she was a victim of, go as far as breaking his arm, and he would need that arm to fulfill his mission on earth. His second mother, Dona Cidália, came into his life, but at the age of 21 he lost her. This had a profound impact on him. For the rest of his life he would greatly miss her affection. Chico often said that the first thing he would like to be able to do as soon as he passed would be to have the possibility of seeing his mothers. In Chico Xavier's life, towards the end of the 1950s, his nephew Amaury caused him a great many problems. This was the son of one of his sisters that had been treated for a spirit obsession, which Chico himself counseled when he was 17. So we see that his life was definitely not easy. His nephew went as far as going to the press with false testimonies about his uncle, and Chico had to defend himself against these false accusations. He was also a victim of fierce bullying during his childhood whilst at school, because his classmates didn't understand him, and thought him to be strange. Chico Xavier also had many issues with his health. He was blind in one eye and saw very little with the other. Towards the end of his life, he was taking 18 different medications a day. He suffered various bouts of pneumonia and struggled with chest pains. His health was truly a major problem. Nonetheless, and despite all these difficulties and physical limitations, he never once failed to fulfill his duty. He also faced doctrine-related struggles. From the moment he embraced Spiritism at the age of 17, he tells us that a power greater than my own will has always upheld me, preventing me from abandoning my mediumship. All the aggressions I encountered came from brethren of the same faith. This information can be found in the book Chico Xavier, Just Mediumship. And here we can see that the fact of him being a spiritist was not a peaceful situation, as there were those within the spiritist movement that caused him many problems. The testimonies of his true love for Jesus is evidenced essentially through his actions, and Chico Xavier was, indeed, a man of actions. André Luiz, in the book Green Sign, tells us that words help us, but actions drag us along. Chico Xavier, by his actions, drags us all along. You may wonder what the meaning of Jesus' hands are, or better yet, in this case, Chico Xavier's hands, since his hands are the extensions of Jesus' hands. We could reply that they personify labor. They personify his love and his selfless dedication to others. Chico Xavier's hands personify personal sacrifice. The benefactor Emmanuel, in the book Living Spring, tells us that our hands will present the result of that which we have done. When we return to the spiritual plane, they will be marked by that which we accomplish on earth. He tells us, your hands are the living antenna whereby we exteriorize our spiritual life. We know that Chico slept very little, and that during the wee hours of the morning, the first thing he did when he was in Uraba was to care for his animals. It was something he loved doing. Chico Xavier's hands are also the example of resignation in favor of his family. We know how important family is, and despite the struggles, never once did he turn his back on family problems. At one point in his life, he had to hold down 3 jobs to be able to provide for his family. His father was ailing at the time. His brothers and some of his brothers-in-law were unemployed, and he had 17 mouths to feed. This was a significant moment in Chico Xavier's life, as it shows true resignation and the depths of his commitment to family. Also, from a family point of view, we cannot help but mention that one of his sister-in-law's sons was called Emmanuel Luiz. That youngster, but a child, had been born under difficult, atoning circumstances, with many physical health issues. He was deaf, dumb, and blind. His arms were atrophied, and his face was deformed. His mother, upon confronting this daunting scenario, ended up being hospitalized. What would become of such a child? Chico Xavier's other sisters, one with 8 children of her own, another with 10, had no possible means with which to care for or educate this child. So Chico took him in and raised him as his own for 12 incredibly difficult years. He would medicate the child, bathe him, care for his personal hygiene, including a daily enema. He would feed him by making small balls of food that he would push down the child's throat with his finger so that he could swallow. It was such a difficult situation for him. Even Emmanuel, his spiritual mentor, tells us that this child would live only until such time as his lungs had space to grow. And in 1949, as a result of a particularly strong bout of the flu, the child passed away, but not before opening his eyes and seeing for the first time. He looked at Chico Xavier and fixed him with a look of intense affection, profound gratitude, and thanks for everything that he had done for him. Emmanuel, who was present and witnessed the scene, later declared, "Thanks be to God. For the first time in 150 years, his eyes have seen the light. His debts have been paid." And at that moment, the child passed away. It was a huge relief for Chico Xavier's family, but at the same time it was also a great loss for him. The physical sense of loss was painful, considering that the child was like a son to him. In this case, we see how our beloved Chico Xavier developed perseverance and resignation. With regards to Chico Xavier's hands, it was those same blessed hands, calloused by work and dedication to others, that embody the consoling hug for suffering mothers. All those mothers that approached Chico seeking help for the pain they carried at having lost a child. He would gather them to him in a comforting embrace. He would listen to their tales, and, more often than not, he would weep with them. During the decades, he would slowly assimilate their pain, and by the time he was 50 years old, he was suffering from chronic chest pains as a result. Yet, he referred to this condition as angina, his friend, and he called this friend Mrs. Angina Pectoris. His humor was always wonderful. He would laugh at his difficult situations, at his struggles. He often spoke to his closest friends about this, teaching them with his humor. Yet, for the majority of us, we see these difficulties as a dark image of struggle and difficulty. Everything is so difficult. This is because we often lack the ability to see the bigger picture and that vision of the reality of spiritual life. But Chico Xavier was always able to translate these examples into beautiful light images, so as to show us the importance of patience and perseverance in doing good. Another major aspect of his life was dedicated to the psychographed letters of consolation that Chico Xavier received since the beginning of his work as a medium. These letters were addressed to parents and family members, and they spanned all the decades in which Chico lived on earth during this reincarnation. In fact, while he was in Uberaba, every Friday and Saturday he would receive these letters. It was a labor of love that always began at 8 p.m. sharp. Chico Xavier said that for his mediumistic work and for spiritist doctrine-related teaching activities, there was a time to begin, but there was never a time to end, and very often that work would go on for 7 hours straight, sometimes longer. He would finish at around 3 in the morning, sometimes 4, and sometimes 5, or even later. During these Friday and Saturday night sessions, the spirits would manifest, bringing with them proof of immortality. Chico would say that for him, these letters didn't just represent the fact that they were consoling, but also because he learned from Emmanuel, André Luiz, Bezerra de Menezes, and Humberto de Campos, as well as from all those spirits that found themselves in difficult situations, and that were sharing their pain and their reality in the spiritual world through these letters. During those 2 days a week, Chico would receive written messages from, on average, 10 spirits a night, with each letter being around 120 to 150 handwritten pages. How many thousands of pages of writing is that? Another momentous time in Chico Xavier's life was on the night of the 10th of July 1927, when a spirit of very high hierarchy made itself seen to Chico's clairvoyance. That night, alone in his room, the light was so intense that Chico thought it might be the Virgin Mary. He knelt and asked, "Who are you?" And the spirit replied, "I am Elizabeth of Aragon." Known as Queen Saint Elizabeth of Portugal, she lived in the 13th century and is remembered for having miraculously turned the bread she was hiding in her apron from her husband, King Denis of Portugal, into roses. The king was very against his queen mixing with the common people, and so she would feed them in secret, knowing that it was against his wishes. That noble spirit, that is Portugal's spirit guide, is mentioned in the book Nossolar as saying, "I come to ask Chico Xavier, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that he distribute bread to our brethren." To which Chico replied, "But how can I distribute bread when I don't even have enough bread with which to feed my own family?" She replied, "Don't worry about that. The resources you need will come." This incident was extraordinary, as it came just 2 days after Chico started his work writing through psychography. Curiously, 2 days later, he, along with his sister, Dona Luisa, took 8 loaves of bread with which to feed his family, and placing them inside a basket, they headed towards the Pedro Leopoldo Bridge. Beneath the bridge was a group of needy and hungry people. It was then and there that he began his charitable works. We can say that the spirit of Elizabeth of Aragon was the spiritual mentor responsible for guiding Chico in this task. Their work together lasted the entirety of his 92-year life, until the date of his passing on the 30th of June 2002. We also remember that every Saturday afternoon in Uberaba, beneath the shade of the avocado tree, Chico Xavier would speak, explain, counsel, and educate on the Gospel according to Spiritism. He would always bring either the Book of Spirits or the Gospel according to Spiritism tucked in beneath his arm, according to his closest friends. One afternoon, during those encounters to study the Gospel, a crowd had gathered around him. He opened the Gospel, read a paragraph, and then gave some of his companions the opportunity to explain the text that had just been read. Afterwards, he would close with his own explanation. This was something that always preceded the bread distribution. And here we see how Chico taught by example, because every word was a testament to that which his hands realized. In the book Chico Xavier Beneath the Shade of the Avocado Tree, we read about the afternoon of April 17th, 1982, where at one point someone goes up to Chico and comments about how inadequate the space is, as it wasn't comfortable for visitors, to which he replied, "When I pass away, my fellow spiritists can build a palace here, but as long as I am here, the symbol of the spiritist doctrine is labor." We find the same practice of open-air teaching with Jesus Christ, where Jesus himself would teach in public spaces. He left us the Sermon on the Mount, which was held in the fresh air. He spoke to thousands of people from all walks of life, teaching love, peace, tolerance, and benevolence. We find Jesus, as told by Chico Xavier, who taught on borrowed boats, in public banks, in the public squares he would pass by, on the hills, and in his friends' homes. The Gospel tells us that he taught at the house of Peter, which he specifically used for the occasion. Chico Xavier asks us if we know what the only property that Christ owned was. His cross, he explains. Christ's cross was the only property he ever possessed. We're not talking about an estate, a house, or other assets belonging to Christ, nor a territory, but a simple cross, which is, as we know, known the world over. Surely this example of labor beneath an avocado tree is a teaching for us spiritists. Isn't it also a lesson from which we can learn that we have no reason not to gather anywhere we want in order to read and study the gospel, to have healthy discussions about spiritist themes, whether they be beneath avocado trees, oak trees, fig trees, jacarandas, beneath a starry sky, where we can enlighten ourselves by learning from the lessons Jesus left us. To welcome anyone willing to listen and learn. Was this not what Jesus taught us? And was this not what Chico Xavier was so well able to show us through his own example in Jesus' name? We also hear of Chico Xavier's physical effects phenomena from his many friends, testifying that his hands would sometimes radiate a strong smell of perfume. Nena Galves, a great friend of his, recalls that at one time she and another friend went to meet Chico, and he gifted them a handkerchief, saying, "I'm sorry, but I only have one." He placed the handkerchief between the palms of his hands, and when he opened them, the handkerchief was completely soaked through. After their return to São Paulo, they had some issues between them regarding the Spiritist doctrine, and they separated as friends, but not before having cut the gifted handkerchief in half. She goes on to say that, just as our friendship separated, so too did the handkerchief. At this point we could ask, which of the two friends should have relinquished the handkerchief? Nena says that she has no doubts that if it were Chico, he would have relinquished it without hesitation. But what about us? Do we have the ability to relinquish that which we currently possess, to learn to let go of, especially our earthly possessions? Those which we know are not even truly ours, because, as Lacordaire's spirit tells us, we are just caretakers and not proprietors, and tells us that everything we have comes from God, and everything will return to God. So nothing is truly ours, except the moral and intellectual conquests we gain on earth. What we are, we take with us to the spiritual plane, but everything we have, we must leave behind, for that belongs to God the Father. So, do we truly have the ability to renounce? Do we not perhaps often live way above our capabilities? Do we not maybe have stale bread in our own homes? There are accounts of many other physical effects phenomena at the hands of Chico Xavier. Geraldo Lemos Neto tells us that once he arrived in Uberaba exhausted. He had little or no strength left to go to work. Chico, having become aware of this, took his hand and held it for a while. During that time, an energy, a strange force so intense, surged through his hand and up his arm, and a short while later, all that exhaustion and weakness was completely gone. It was as if he had received a healing touch of pure light directly from Chico Xavier. The same can be said about Chico Xavier's aura, about his magnetism, as certainly those with greater sensitivity attested whenever they came close to him. They were naturally revitalized because of the energy that he irradiated. A group of specialists at NASA met with Chico Xavier in Pedro Leopoldo to measure his aura and found that it was 15 meters. 15 meters, my friends. That's not just from here to there. That is huge. We also know that his aura contained a veritable pharmacy of medication. This is part of and is a characteristic sign of a superior spirit, one which is responsible for great tasks, those that originate from the higher spiritual spheres, because they carry within them that same energy. The expansion of that energy is as a result of their conduct, the accomplishment of their duties, and of their unconditional love. Still, with regards to the physical effects phenomena, we would like to share with you a most peculiar but very interesting case, one that involves none other than Martins Peralva. Martins Peralva was a spiritist since he was 5 years old. His father was a spiritist who presided over the Sergipe Spiritist Federation for 18 years. Sergipe was also his hometown. He was a public speaker, writer, and was part of the board of directors of the Spiritist Union of Minas Gerais for approximately 30 years. But he suffered from tuberculosis. When he learned of his diagnosis, his doctor suggested that he go to one of 2 cities at the time that were known for its tuberculosis-friendly climate, either Belo Horizonte or Petrópolis. Martins Peralva chose the city of Belo Horizonte for the sole reason that it was close to Chico Xavier. Chico at the time was living in Pedro Leopoldo, which is approximately 40 kilometers away from Belo Horizonte. Martins Peralva later ended up moving to Pedro Leopoldo with his wife and his daughter, and it was there that he met Chico Xavier. A friendship so profound and so intense was born, one that would last decades until Chico's passing in 2002. Peralva recalls how he was once invited by Chico Xavier to participate in one of the materialization sessions that were held in Pedro Leopoldo. He recounts how during one session a spirit materialized itself. That spirit was Sheila, completely materialized by Chico's physical effects mediumship. The spirit even spoke with a characteristic German accent, considering she had been a German nurse in her last reincarnation. She turned to him and asked, "Sir, do you have faith?" And he replied, "Yes, ma'am, I do." "In that case, please allow me to unbutton your jacket and your shirt," she replied. Peralva noticed that as she rose her right hand, a gourd, a type of recipient, was materializing. As she tipped the recipient over him, he felt a type of liquid pouring over his face, soaking his chest, and that liquid, that water, was absorbed by his physical body. From that moment on, doctors could find not a single trace of tuberculosis in Martins Peralva. We can state that this is absolutely a case of healing by means of Chico Xavier's physical effects mediumship. This incident happened around 1949, and Martins Peralva eventually passed in 2008, 6 years after Chico Xavier. When speaking of Chico Xavier, we naturally have to address a few characteristics that are so unique to him, because he was someone who treated everyone equally. He did not discriminate anyone, and treated the cleaning lady and the shoemaker exactly the same way as he treated the politician, the nobleman, or even the president himself. He was a truly simple man, without vanity, and he was the absolute embodiment of humility. We see how Chico Xavier was able to descend to our level, to make himself one of us, to journey alongside us, and to show us the importance of learning to love and to serve. Chico Xavier's life is, without question, an example of love. But it's not just the exemplification of love that we find in Chico. We also see true genius. He was a man that knew a little about everything, from culture to science, philosophy, fine arts, astronomy, medicine, everything. We have but to look at the various interviews he gave over the years to get an idea of the nature of the concepts that he mastered. We can easily see that this is no ordinary soul. We see by his example how he was able to translate to us the concept of the blessed man, as described in the Beatitudes, which can be found in Matthew, in the Gospel according to Spiritism. Because he was such a simple and humble man, he is able to show us meekness, as a man who personifies pureness of heart. He is the embodiment of a good man. This extraordinary characteristic of his, to not differentiate anyone, made it so that everyone wanted to be around him, so much so that it drew massive crowds to him. For example, when he signed books, he would always do so sitting down, but he would always stand when handing the book to the person, and always made it a point to have a quick chat with them. If a person kissed his hands, he would return the kiss on theirs. This is a huge lesson for us all, how we too should answer to and care for our own relationships. He was a teacher to us all, one that not only taught but also served, so that we could also learn to serve, just as he did, and so very well. Adelino de Silveira tells us that one day, when he was meeting Chico Xavier at his home, at a time when Chico was unable to go to the Spiritist Center due to his failing health, sometime towards the end of the 1980s, how a crowd had formed in the street in front of his home. So large was it that from the gate the crowd could be seen stretching a few blocks away. This became the norm, and every single person waited patiently and eventually made their way to the house, one by one. People of all ages, from all walks of life, and from the furthest reaches of Brazil. Some would be heard to say, "All I want to do is touch Chico Xavier," or "My greatest wish is to meet Chico Xavier, to see him, hear his voice, shake his hand." Many of those that sought Chico wanted news from their deceased loved ones, most specifically, to rule out the idea of any attempted suicides that they may have been harboring. Others would say that they had nothing to ask of him, but would weep when coming close to him. A single, simple word from Chico was always enough to light their faces immediately. Don't we all wish for that one single solitary word that we can remember for the rest of our lives? Whatever Chico would say, no matter how little, would be branded in the hearts of the people. And we have so much to be grateful for, to all of those people who, by their recollections, helped bring the life of Chico Xavier, as well as all those that are still able to do so, closer to our hearts. So Adelino, faced with such an incredible scene, especially considering the manner in which Chico received each and every person, got to thinking, my God, Chico's aura is so good, his magnetism is so great, that it seems to just obliterate our pain and soothe our anxieties. As soon as he thought this, Chico approached Adelino and told him, I am moved by the kindness these people show me by coming to visit me, but I have nothing more to offer them, as I am nearly at my last. Why do you think they come? Adelino, stunned, thought to himself, what do I reply to such a man? How can I answer him without hurting his feelings. Chico kept looking at him, waiting for a reply, so he simply said, "I think they miss Jesus." That is the Chico Xavier that treated everyone the same way, with all his heart and soul, without discriminating skin color, social status, sex, creed, religion, or whatever else. Everyone was on absolutely equal footing, as we've shown here today. The same is true of his immense literary works, that we could not naturally leave unmentioned. By Chico Xavier's hands, a cyclopean 540 works of mediumistic literature have been materialized to date. These books, these immense books that we now have at our disposal, are impossible for any one of us to read them all in just one existence. Fortunately, they don't represent our necessities just for the present, so we have centuries ahead of us to analyze and study, discuss and reflect on all of the lessons contained therein. These books come to us from the higher spiritual planes as a result of Chico Xavier being, in reality, a good medium as well as a good man. Therefore, these books that come to us by his blessed hands are like dewdrops raining down upon us from up high. What do we mean by this? It means that we, in reality, need to educate ourselves. We need to cultivate that knowledge, and we need to develop it and reflect upon it, don't we? These ideas, the concepts that are addressed in the literature, are like seeds that sow light into the hearts of man. These books open the paths of our lives. They free us and feed our souls, helping us to become better versions of ourselves, showing us that we are all children of God. They are the books that bear witness to the reality of the contact that exists between the spiritual and the physical plane. Lessons that are unending and come in a profuse way through Chico's mediumship to teach us the importance of doing good, being charitable, seeing how this is Spiritism's golden standard in this world. They are the books that show that the Earth is not the only inhabited planet, and there are countless worlds all across the universe that act as learning centers, schools, universities, through which the spirit can pass on its ascension towards God, where we need to raise our heads and start our own climb up Jacob's stairs that will lead us to Jesus, and from Jesus to God, our Lord and Father. These books that exist through Chico Xavier's disciplined hands are constant teachings that come to heal our wounds, show us the reason why we suffer the tribulations we suffer, and give us the strength to face them without complaint, lifting instead our gaze towards the stars in gratitude. Chico Xavier's books are the complete and amplified extension of the codification works of Allan Kardec. We could even say in this regard that the hands of Chico Xavier are the same hands of Kardec. A literary work of this magnitude brought to us by this notable spirit is impossible without an equally notable man behind it. Because the spirits, in light of all the information they bring us, which flows from the highest pinnacles of spirituality, must find a base and a platform capable of receiving such knowledge. Chico Xavier was, without a shadow of a doubt, the example of a good medium amongst us, a living model of a good man. 75 years of mediumship with Jesus, serving as an example of renunciation and of selflessness. We have so much to learn from Chico Xavier, my dear friends. As we reach the end of this presentation, we reflect upon the question that is contained in the Book of Spirits, number 625. What is the type of man that God sent us to serve as guide and model? And the Spirit's categorical answer is, see Jesus. Therefore, if Jesus is humanity's guide and model, who is our guide and model? We could say Chico Xavier. To paraphrase Martins Peralva, Chico Xavier is our little Jesus. May Jesus, our teacher, sustain us all, and may we, by working to study and researching Chico Xavier's life's work, make his example a reality in our own lives. May Jesus and Chico Xavier bless us today and always. Thank you.